On the morning Kemet won $50 million, she thought her life had finally turned golden. But by afternoon, she stood outside her husband's office door, clutching her son, listening to the sounds of betrayal that shattered everything she believed in. The moment her husband called her a country bumpkin and planned to dump her with fake debts. Something inside her didn't break, it awakened. This isn't the story of a heartbroken wife. It's the story of a woman who turned silence into a weapon and brought down a predator brick by brick. On that quiet Tuesday morning, nothing hinted that Kemet's life was standing on the edge of a cliff. She was doing what she did every day, cleaning the house, watching her 3-year-old son Jabari stack brightly colored blocks on the living room rug, and mentally running through the grocery list. The old lottery ticket she had bought the day before wasn't even a memory until she saw it pinned under a notepad, almost as if fate had placed it there on purpose. She checked the numbers on her phone casually, expecting nothing. But when the numbers began lining up one after another, -5, 12, 23, 34, 45, Megaball 5, the world seemed to stop spinning. Her hands shook. Her knees buckled. She sank to the floor as reality crashed in. She had won $50 million, a regular stay-at-home mom, now holding a fortune. The first tear that slipped down her cheek wasn't joy, it was disbelief, the kind that hits like a tidal wave before the celebration even begins. But joy came next, wild, overwhelming, intoxicating joy. She clutched her sleeping son, whispering promises of a better life. She pictured a big yard, the best schools, vacations they had only talked about, and a future without financial fear. Most of all, she imagined her husband Zolani, finally relieved from the pressure of running his struggling construction firm. She imagined his face lighting up when she told him. Following impulse and love, she scooped up Jabari, grabbed her purse, and called an Uber straight to his office. Every second of the ride was filled with hope. She kept smiling at strangers, her heart bursting with anticipation, the kind that makes you believe the universe is finally aligning in your favor. She rehearsed the moment in her head a dozen times, his joy, his shock, their embrace. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe their future was going to be beautiful. But as she reached her husband's office, the joy that filled her like sunlight turned to ice. His door was slightly ajar, just enough for life to deliver its cruelest blow. Inside, she heard soft giggles, whispers, the kind reserved for lovers who believe no one is listening. And then she heard his voice, a tone she had never heard him use with her. Words that shattered her heart with a speed she didn't know was possible. "Don't worry, my love. Once I straighten things out with that country bumpkin at home, I'll file for divorce immediately." Her breath caught, she froze. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She heard the woman's voice next. Sahara, the girl he once told her was just his sister's friend. They spoke openly, cruelly about their plans, leaving Kemet with nothing, faking company debts, manipulating her into signing whatever they wanted. They mocked her loyalty, they mocked her simplicity. And in that moment, $50 million meant nothing, because the man she had loved for 5 years turned out to be a stranger wearing her husband's face. Yet as the betrayal unfolded inches from her, something inside Kemet shifted, not into rage, not into grief, but into an eerie, icy clarity. She didn't storm in, she didn't scream. She didn't confront them, though every instinct in her body begged to. Instead, she became utterly still, silent, calculating. She realized that if she revealed herself now, she would lose everything, her stability, her son, and her future. And so she did the one thing they never expected. She smiled quietly, turned around, and walked away before they ever knew she was there. Because in that moment, she understood the truth. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one. And the woman walking out of that office was no longer the naive wife they believed they could destroy. She was someone else entirely. Someone reborn. Someone dangerous. The moment Kemet stepped out of that office building, the world around her looked the same. Cars passing, people chatting, sunlight warming the pavement. But inside her, everything had changed. It almost felt unreal, walking with her son in her arms while carrying the weight of betrayal heavy enough to crush someone else. Her thoughts raced, not in chaos, but with razor-sharp clarity. She replayed every whisper she had heard, every cruel word, every smug giggle from the woman who'd been eating at her dinner table. She didn't tremble, she didn't collapse. Instead, she swallowed her devastation like a bitter pill and forced her breathing to steady. Silence, she realized, was no longer a sign of weakness. It was camouflage, the only shield she had until the right moment to strike. And if she played the role of the clueless, fragile wife long enough, she could turn their arrogance into their downfall. Inside the Uber home, Kemet held Jabari close, her tears silently sliding down her cheeks while the driver pretended not to notice. But the grief she felt quickly hardened into determination. With every mile that passed, she understood more clearly that exposing her husband now would only help him. He would twist the narrative, manipulate the situation, and use the system, and his mistress, to strip her of everything, including her child. So she began constructing a plan. Carefully, quietly, she reminded herself of something she had forgotten over years of putting others first. She was stronger than she ever gave herself credit for. She had endured loneliness, financial struggle, sacrifice, and deception without even knowing it. But now that she saw the truth, she wouldn't endure it silently. She would weaponize that silence. She would let them believe she knew nothing, suspected nothing, and posed no threat. And while they danced proudly in their lies, she would build the trap beneath their feet. At home, the moment she laid Jabari in his bed, the mask slipped and the pain crashed into her full force. She locked herself in the bathroom, turned on the faucet to drown the sound, and finally let the sobs escape. Her body shook with the kind of heartbreak that breaks more than just trust. It breaks the version of yourself that belonged to someone else. This wasn't just infidelity, it was cruelty, calculated and cold. Her husband calling her a country bumpkin, his mistress mocking her quiet life. Their plan to leave her with debt, with nothing, with a ruined future. They weren't just ending a marriage, they were trying to erase her entirely. But as the tears finally slowed, she felt something new rise inside her, not hopelessness, but fire. A fierce, protective fire that came from the deepest place inside any mother. They could try to break her, but they would never touch her son. And she would make sure of that, even if it meant becoming someone she had never been before. Standing at the bathroom mirror, eyes swollen and face streaked with tears, she made a silent vow. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same one who woke up that morning. That woman believed in her husband. That woman thought loyalty was enough. That woman put her future in someone else's hands. But this woman, the one who had witnessed her own destruction and walked away unnoticed, was different. Steel was forming where softness used to be. Strategy where trust used to live. And all of it fueled by one truth. She had $50 million, a secret powerful enough to reshape her destiny. Silence would be her disguise. Patience would be her blade. And when the time came, she would strike in a way neither her husband nor his mistress could ever predict. Tonight, she wasn't just surviving betrayal. She was preparing for war. Kemet arrived at her childhood home carrying more than luggage. She carried a secret big enough to change every life it touched. The quiet, familiar hum of the small Florida town felt strangely comforting after the storm inside her. Her mother, Sophia, welcomed her with the warm embrace only a mother can give, unaware of the weight pressing against her daughter's chest. For a moment, Kemet wanted to collapse in her arms and cry out the truth, the betrayal, the mistress, the planned divorce, the fake debts. But she held herself together until nightfall, waiting until the house grew quiet and her father stepped out to visit a neighbor. Only then, in the dim kitchen light, did the mask crumble. She sank to her knees, clutching her mother's legs, sobbing the kind of tears that carried pain too heavy for words. When Kemet finally confessed everything, the cheating, the lies, the $50,000 fake debt scheme, her mother's face went pale with shock and then flushed with fury. Sophia was a gentle woman, but like many mothers, she carried a warrior's heart when her child was threatened. She vowed to confront Zelani, to drive to Atlanta that very night and fight for her daughter's honor. But Kemet stopped her. She explained that rage wouldn't save her. Strategy would. And then she revealed the secret that rewrote the entire story. She had won $50 million. Her mother froze, staring at the ticket as though it were a relic from another world. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then something remarkable happened. Her expression shifted from shock to fierce determination. She understood instantly. This wasn't just money. This was Kemet's freedom. Kemet explained the only plan that could keep her and Jabari safe. The prize had to be claimed in someone else's name. If she claimed it herself, Zelani would see the money, demand half or worse, manipulate the courts to take everything. But her mother was ironclad, loyal, silent, unshakable. Sophia agreed without hesitation. She didn't ask for guarantees. She didn't worry about being the legal owner of millions. She simply looked at her daughter with the unwavering love of a woman who had spent her whole life protecting her child. The two of them spent hours planning, calling the lottery office discreetly, preparing ID documents, selecting a new bank, even using a burner phone so nothing could be traced back to Atlanta. That kitchen, small, warm, smelling faintly of cornbread, became the war room where their family's survival was rewritten. When Sophia walked into the state lottery headquarters, disguised behind a mask, cap, and nervous smile, she carried more than a ticket. She carried her daughter's future. And when she walked out hours later with paperwork signed and the funds quietly routing to a brand new credit union account, the shift was seismic. A poor, betrayed wife no longer had to fear losing everything, because she now had everything she needed to fight back. The pact between mother and daughter was unspoken but unbreakable. One would hold the fortune. The other would wield it. That night, Kemet returned to Atlanta with her son, not as a woman running from betrayal, but as a woman armed with power no one else knew she had. The war her husband started was about to enter a new phase, and she was finally ready. When Kemet returned to Atlanta, she walked into her home as a completely different woman, but no one could know it. She arrived late on purpose, exhausted from the trip, carrying Jabari on her hip and wearing clothes so plain they blended into the background. As expected, Zelani barely lifted his eyes from the TV. He offered no warmth, no curiosity, no guilt. Instead, he glanced at her swollen eyes and casually asked if she had been crying, unaware that every step she took was part of an act he had already fallen for. She murmured about feeling unwell, about needing a break, about staying with her mother for fresh air, feeding him exactly the story he needed to hear. He bought it instantly. His acceptance wasn't comforting. It confirmed his arrogance. He truly believed she was harmless. That belief would be the very thing that destroyed him. Over the next few days, Kemet perfected her disguise. She cooked simple meals, downgraded their groceries, and kept her head low. She stopped asking questions. She stopped arguing. Every gesture, every silence, every sad smile was designed to make him underestimate her further. And it worked flawlessly. Solani drifted around the house like a man who had already moved on, checking his phone constantly, leaving late at night, sneaking in after dawn. He didn't hide his distance. In his mind, she was a burden, a broken wife who had wasted her savings and trapped him in a failing business. He didn't know she had millions. He didn't know she had a plan. He didn't know the quiet woman folding laundry in the living room was studying him like a hunter observing prey. And he didn't know that every cold glance he threw at her only sharpened her resolve. But the most critical step came one night when she offered him a cup of warm water, a gesture she once did out of love, now done out of strategy. With perfect timing, she confessed she felt guilty for being useless, for failing him, for making financial mistakes. She begged him to let her help at the company, even in a small way. The request was deliberately humble, almost pitiful. And Zelani reacted exactly as she predicted, with dismissive superiority. He agreed not because he needed her, but because it pleased him to see her trying to make up for her mistakes. He believed having her in the office would keep her under his thumb, a powerless wife doing menial tasks while he played executive with his mistress. He didn't know Kemet wasn't coming to be controlled. She was coming to observe, to collect, to infiltrate the world where he thought she didn't belong. The following Monday, Kemet dropped Jabari at daycare with a heavy heart but a steady purpose. She arrived at the company wearing faded clothes, hair tied plainly, no makeup, nothing that hinted at the storm within her. And the moment she stepped inside, she felt it, the eyes on her. Some curious, some pitying, some judging, but none dangerous. She was invisible in all the ways that mattered. Zolani and Zahara swept past her looking like the perfect couple, and Kemet bowed her head, swallowing the humiliation like poison she planned to turn into an antidote. Because the lion's den wasn't her downfall, it was her battlefield. And now that she was inside, no one realized the truth. The weakest-looking person in the room was the one holding all the power. From the moment Kemet stepped into the office, she understood exactly how the employees saw her, a pitiful housewife dragged in by a failing husband to help out with low-level tasks. She didn't correct them. She didn't lift her chin or try to prove anything. Instead, she embraced the role completely. She arrived early to brew coffee, wiped down dusty desks, sorted messy stacks of papers, and refilled water coolers as if she belonged nowhere else. And every time someone looked at her with pity, it only strengthened her disguise. She didn't need respect. She needed invisibility. Humiliation became her cloak. Each small task she performed wasn't an act of submission, but camouflage, a way to fade into the background until people forgot she existed. And as they talked freely around her, dismissing her as harmless, she listened. Quietly. Carefully. Collecting every detail like pieces of a puzzle. Zahara, dressed in designer dresses and expensive perfume, made sure Kemet felt the company hierarchy every chance she got. She snapped orders, demanded special coffee blends, complained about trivial details, and strutted around like the rightful queen of the office. And Zolani, her once loving husband, treated Kemet colder than any stranger in the building. He avoided eye contact, referred to her as KT instead of her name, and talked down at her as if she were just another employee he barely tolerated. But instead of breaking her, their cruelty only sharpened her awareness. Their arrogance made them sloppy. They whispered secrets behind half-closed doors. They left documents out. They argued openly when they thought no one was listening. Playing the invisible wife allowed her to move through the office unseen, gathering emotional strength with every slight, and gathering information with every overheard conversation. Yet it was the accounting department that captured her attention the most. The staff there, quiet, organized, and overworked, were the key to uncovering her husband's deception. And among them, one person stood out. Mrs. Eleanor, the stern seasoned head accountant, whose eyes held more exhaustion than loyalty. At first, Eleanor kept her distance, focused on her strict routines. But Kemet, mastering subtlety, began building a quiet bridge. She brought her herbal tea, shared small lunches, and approached her with the humble sincerity of someone simply trying to survive. Slowly, the older woman's hardened expression softened. She spoke more freely. She even allowed hints of irritation whenever Zahara strutted by making demands. Beneath Eleanor's disciplined exterior, Kemet sensed a woman who disliked the chaos caused by her husband and his mistress, and Kemet knew that resentment could become an opportunity. As days passed, Kemet's invisibility became her greatest asset. She slipped through hallways unnoticed, entered rooms without anyone pausing their conversations, and quietly studied the dynamics of the firm like a detective hidden in plain sight. She memorized names, patterns, alliances, complaints, anything that could help her understand where the cracks in Zolani's empire were. Every evening, while walking home with Jabari's small hand in hers, she replayed everything she had heard, organizing it like pieces of a strategy map. The humiliation she endured was real, but so was her purpose. She wasn't trapped. She was infiltrating. And though no one knew it, the office they laughed in, gossiped in, and cheated in was about to become the stage where everything they built came crashing down. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind where nothing seems remarkable, yet everything changes. The office was quieter than usual. Most employees had stepped out for lunch, Zahara had retreated to soothe her fatigue, and Zolani was off, pretending to solve business problems when he was really tending to his mistress. Only Kemet and Mrs. Eleanor remained, each lost in their own work. But then, as if fate nudged her forward, Kemet noticed something strange. Eleanor's computer screen flickered, rebooted, and instead of loading the usual loss reports, it opened a file she had never seen before, goldmine.xlsx. One look at the document made Kemet's breath hitch. It wasn't a record of losses, it was the truth. Hidden assets, real profits. Secret transfers to a shell company under Zolani's family name. Every detail of the scam that was meant to bankrupt her, laid out clearly, in numbers even she could understand. For the first time, she saw the map of his lies. She saw the heart of the empire he built on deceit. And she realized she was staring at the key to destroying him, but the window closed as quickly as it appeared. Eleanor returned with her coffee, unaware of the treasure she had nearly exposed. Still, the glimpse was enough to ignite something fierce inside Kemet. She needed that file, she needed proof. She needed a weapon. And getting it meant taking the biggest risk of her life. That night, she bought a cheap USB drive and spent hours practicing how quickly she could plug it in, open a folder, and copy a file without trembling. Her heart pounded with fear, but her purpose burned brighter. She knew Eleanor wasn't Solani's loyal accomplice. She wasn't part of the scam. She was simply an employee maintaining the system built around her. If anything, Kemet sensed a quiet bitterness in the woman, a resentment toward being ordered around by the mistress, overlooked by the boss, undervalued despite her loyalty. Kemet's instincts told her that Eleanor was not her enemy. The real enemy was the man who assumed no woman would ever be smart enough to outmaneuver him. The next day, she created her opportunity. While Eleanor ate lunch, Kemet caused a small, controlled electrical short near the office kettle, sending sparks flying and plunging the office into darkness. The moment the lights cut out, Eleanor panicked, rushing toward the breaker panel, exactly what Kemet needed. In seconds, she slid into Eleanor's chair, turned on the computer, inserted the USB, and navigated to the file. But then, a problem she hadn't anticipated appeared, a password box. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She tried numbers, family dates, holidays. Nothing worked. Eleanor was returning. Desperation rose like a tide. She pulled the USB out, a failed attempt, just as the older woman walked back in. But what came next was something Kemet could never have predicted. Eleanor didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She didn't call Zolani. She simply stared, with a look that was a mixture of understanding, pity, and perhaps a little rebellion of her own. Later that evening, fate offered her a second chance. As the last employees left, Eleanor returned unexpectedly after forgetting her phone, only to find Kemet once again copying the file. This time the progress bar hit 100%. They locked eyes, and everything hung in the silence between them. Eleanor knew. She knew about the file. She knew about the mistress. She knew about the corruption. Her voice shook, not with anger, but with resignation. "Take it," she whispered. "And don't ever come back here again." She handed Kemet the USB as though she were handing over a piece of her own conscience. In that moment, the older woman wasn't an obstacle. She was an unlikely ally. Kemet walked out of the building clutching the proof that would change everything. She came into that office as a defeated wife, but she walked out with the evidence that could tear down her husband's entire empire. The game was no longer even now. She was the one holding the power. The irony of it all was almost poetic. By the time Zolani walked into the house with that cold, rehearsed expression, ready to announce the divorce he had been plotting behind her back, Kemet already possessed everything she needed to destroy him. but she played her role with the precision of a seasoned actress. When he declared, "I want a divorce," her spoon clattered to the floor, her eyes widened, her voice cracked, all of it intentional, all of it believable. He mistook her stunned silence for helplessness. He mistook her trembling breath for fear. And with each cruel word he spoke about moving on, about having someone else, about starting a new family, she let him believe she was collapsing under the weight of his rejection. What he didn't know was that every tear she shed was controlled, measured, and part of the performance that would make him confident enough to sign his own downfall. He presented the papers with mock sympathy, acting like a victim of circumstances. The document was everything he had meticulously planned. No shared assets, no shared debts, and most painfully, no alimony. He wanted her with nothing. Not a cent, not even support for their son. "Just sign," he ordered, tossing the pen toward her like she was beneath him. And she did, slowly, shakily, as though her world were collapsing. But the only thing collapsing was the illusion of control he thought he had. Her signature wasn't an act of surrender. It was the final step in luring him into the trap he built himself. With the pen still warm in her fingers, she realized he had just handed her the greatest advantage she could ever have. Because by claiming he had no assets, no income, and no financial stability, he had unknowingly confessed to fraud the moment she exposed the hidden millions he stole. But he didn't stop there. His cruelty always needed one final flourish. He told her to pack up and leave immediately, claiming the bank was repossessing the house. He pretended to be burdened by debt, by financial ruin, by obligations he had no intention of honoring. He acted as though he was doing her a favor by letting her take custody of Jabari, not realizing she already held proof that would later prove exactly how stable and deceitful he truly was. And in that moment, she looked at him, not with love or heartbreak, but with a kind of clarity she had never known before. This was not the man she loved. This was the man she survived. She watched him walk out the door, not knowing that he had just walked into the storm she had crafted with silent precision. 2 days later, they stood in the courtroom. He in a sharp suit and polished shoes, his mistress seated proudly behind him, belly in full display, like she had already replaced Kemet in every part of life. Kemet, in contrast, looked broken, tired, almost invisible, and that was exactly how she wanted it. The judge approved the divorce swiftly, barely glancing at either of them. Zolani didn't look at her once. He whispered to Zahara, they smirked as if they had won. But when Kemet stepped outside into the rain, clutching Jabari close, a slow cold smile touched her lips. Because they believed they had stripped her of everything. They believed they had cast her aside. But the truth was entirely different. She wasn't leaving as a discarded woman. She was leaving as a woman armed with millions, legal leverage, and the receipts of his crimes. The divorce was not the end of her story. It was the moment she stepped onto the battlefield with every weapon she needed. When Kemet left the courthouse that day, soaked by the rain and carrying her son on her hip, the world saw a woman who had been discarded. A woman stripped of her marriage, her home, her financial safety. But the moment she stepped into the luxury Uber she had quietly ordered beforehand, the illusion cracked. She leaned back in the leather seat, held Jabari close, and allowed herself to breathe, deeply, freely for the first time in years. She wasn't going back to a cramped rental or a pity-filled relative's house. She was going somewhere her ex-husband couldn't imagine in his wildest dreams, $1 million condo purchased discreetly under her mother's name. A place with 24-hour security, a private elevator, and a view of the Chattahoochee River that made the city sparkle at night. She wasn't running. She was rebuilding, quietly, strategically, and far beyond anyone's radar. The moment she unlocked the door to her new home, Jabari squealed with delight, sprinting across the open floor plan as if he knew they had stepped into a new chapter. For the first time in what felt like forever, Kemet cried tears that weren't born from pain, but from relief, from victory, from safety. She took a long shower, washing away the remnants of her old life, scrubbing every last trace of sadness, betrayal, and humiliation from her skin. Then she stood before the mirror, wrapped in a towel, and stared at the woman reflected there. Not the timid housewife her husband dismissed. Not the broken mother her husband tried to ruin. She saw steel, she saw strategy. She saw a woman who had been wronged and survived. And most importantly, she saw someone powerful enough to bring down the man who underestimated her. That first night in her new home, Kemet didn't sleep. While Jabari dozed peacefully surrounded by new toys, she opened her laptop and inserted the USB Eleanor had given her. The golden dagger poised directly at the heart of her ex-husband's empire. She studied every number, every fraudulent transfer, every hidden asset and fake debt. She printed documents, highlighted accounts, mapped out timelines, and connected every dot with a level of clarity she never knew she possessed. And with each detail she uncovered, her anger evolved into purpose. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about protecting her son. It was about tearing down the empire her husband built with lies, manipulation, and stolen money. And she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed allies, people who hated Zelani as much as she did. People he had also wronged. By dawn, her plan was set. She would destroy him not with screaming or chaos, but with precision. She would bring down his business, his reputation, and every lie he ever tried to bury. And the first name on her list was someone her husband thought she'd never remember. Malik, the former partner he had cheated years ago and discarded like trash. A man who had lost everything because of Zolani's deceit. A man with nothing left to lose. She was no longer a scared wife hiding from a monster. She was a strategist preparing for war. As the sun rose over Atlanta, she looked out at the glowing skyline with quiet determination. "It's time," she whispered. Her rebirth wasn't dramatic or loud. It was calm, calculated, inevitable, and from the shadows she was finally ready to strike. Finding Malik wasn't difficult. Broken men rarely leave the shadows. His workshop sat at the edge of a dusty road in Lithonia, a place that had once held promise but now felt forgotten, much like the man himself. When Kemet stepped inside, the smell of rust and metal hit her first, followed by the sight of Malik hunched over a machine, sleeves rolled up, face streaked with sweat and defeat. He barely looked up when she said his name, until she mentioned Zelani. The wrench slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. His posture stiffened, his jaw clenched, and the bitterness in his eyes flared alive. He didn't know who she was, but the moment she said, "I know what he did to you," something shifted. For the first time in years, Malik found someone who didn't deny his truth. Someone who had lived the same betrayal in a different form. She told him only what he needed to know, that she was Zelani's ex-wife, that she had proof of his fraud, and that she wasn't there for sympathy, she was there for justice. Malik listened in stunned silence as she slid the photos, copies, and printed spreadsheets across his desk. Each page revealed what he had suspected for years. The fake debts, the hidden accounts, the diversion of funds, the deceit that forced him into bankruptcy. His face crumpled, not in weakness but in vindication. "I knew it," he whispered, voice shaking. For the first time, he wasn't the crazy one. Not the fool who mismanaged his part of the partnership. Not the man people mocked for throwing away a good opportunity. He was the victim of a predator. And Kemet had the receipts. When she finally asked, "Will you help me?" he didn't hesitate. "I'll burn his whole world down," he said. "Just tell me where to start." With Malik on her side, the plan accelerated. He had access to old clients, former employees, past contracts, people Zelani had stepped on while climbing the ladder of deceit. And as the two of them quietly pieced together timelines, forged connections, and matched hidden funds to fraudulent signatures, a clearer picture emerged. Zelani was not just immoral, he was criminal. Malik contacted a tax consultant he trusted. Kemet spoke with an attorney specializing in financial fraud and asset concealment. Together, They built a file thick enough to send the most confident man into a panic. And the beauty of it all? Zolani had no idea. To him, Kemet was still the weak, heartbroken ex-wife crying in a tiny apartment. He didn't know she now lived in luxury. He didn't know she had allies. He didn't know every lie he'd ever crafted was being extracted and arranged into a noose that fit perfectly around his ego. When the reports were finally ready, the complete breakdown of his fraudulent transfers, shell companies, hidden profits, and falsified bankruptcy statements, Kemet didn't send them to him. She sent them to the 3 places she knew would shatter him: the IRS, the State Fraud Investigation Unit, and the Licensing Board for Construction Contractors. Within days, quiet inquiries turned into loud alarms. Banks began freezing accounts. Auditors requested emergency meetings. And Zolani, oblivious, continued parading around with his mistress, believing he had won. But his fall had already begun. Slowly, silently, perfectly orchestrated. Like a predator stepping into his own trap, every stride he took brought him closer to the collapse he created. And Kemet, watching from the shadows of her new life, didn't celebrate. She simply waited. Because taking down a man like him wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. And justice, when delivered with patience and precision, is far more devastating than rage. The news of Zolani's downfall didn't arrive all at once. It trickled in slowly, like cracks appearing in the walls of a house built on lies. First came the frantic calls he made to former partners, calls that went unanswered. Then came the letters from the IRS, the frozen accounts, the surprise audits at his office, the panicked emails from his own accountant. And finally, the collapse of his company's facade as investigators began interviewing employees he once treated like disposable props. For the first time in his life, Zolani looked small, cornered, exposed. The mistress who once flaunted her place at his side started distancing herself, terrified of being dragged down with him. Kemet didn't need to be there to witness it. Malik kept her informed, each update confirming exactly what she already knew. The predator had finally met a trap he couldn't escape. But while his world crumbled, Kemet's life unfolded into something beautiful, something she never dared to imagine while trapped in the shadows of his control. She enrolled Jabari in a prestigious preschool, watching him blossom into a confident, joyful little boy. She bought new clothes, not designer labels to impress, but pieces that made her feel strong, capable, and entirely her own. She spent mornings sipping tea on her balcony, nights journaling about her plans, and afternoons reading books she never had time for. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was simply living, truly living. And in the quiet moments, she realized something even more profound. Revenge wasn't what freed her. Knowledge did. Courage did. Breaking the chains of the life she once thought she was supposed to accept. That was her victory. Still, closure came unexpectedly. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Atlanta skyline, her phone buzzed. Malik had sent a message. He lost everything. Zolani had been stripped of his contractor license, audited for tax fraud, and sued for multiple violations tied to his hidden accounts. Even the luxury apartment he shared with Zahara was seized as evidence. Zahara, pregnant and furious, left him publicly. When Kemet read the final line of Malik's message, he said your name. He realized it was you. She took a slow breath and closed her eyes. She felt no triumph, no hunger for more. Just a quiet, steady sense of finality. He had taken her peace once, but she had taken back her power forever. And that, she knew, mattered more than any courtroom victory or public humiliation could ever bring. In the months that followed, Kemet built a new identity for herself, not a wife, not a victim, not a shadow of someone else's life. She became a businesswoman, an investor, a mother who protected her son fiercely and lived with intention. She donated to women's shelters, she funded educational programs. She helped other mothers who felt trapped, isolated, or overlooked. Her new life wasn't born from revenge. It was built from the ashes of everything she survived. And one quiet night, as she tucked Jabari into his bed in their beautiful, peaceful home. He looked up at her with sleepy eyes and whispered, "Mommy, you're so strong." In that moment, she finally allowed herself to believe it. She didn't just escape a monster, she became her own hero. And her story, once drenched in betrayal and pain, transformed into something far more powerful. A life rebuilt not from luck alone, but from courage, strategy, and the unbreakable love of a mother who refused to be destroyed.